With the scent of dust and sweat thick in the air, the cold desert wind howled as Daniel clutched his mother's hand. Hope, his mother, stood tall, her face battered but her spirit unyielding. The men surrounded her with stones clenched in their fists, their eyes burning with misguided righteousness. "Renounce your faith," one spat, his voice sharp like a dagger. But Hope did not bow. "Even if I die, my God lives." The first stone struck, then another. Daniel screamed as he watched his mother fall to the ground, blood staining the sand beneath her. His heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and in that moment he made a vow. He would never trust God again. Hope was gone, and so was his faith. Hope was marked for death long before that fateful night. She had done the unthinkable, challenging the village elders. When a young woman was sentenced to execution, Hope stepped in, shielding her with her own body. "Mercy is greater than judgment," she had pleaded. "Let not your rage consume you." The elders saw it as treason. Her defiance was insulting, and they couldn't ignore it. That night, torches flickered like hungry eyes as they dragged her to the village square. No trial, no farewell. Only the cold weight of stones pressed into vengeful hands by the order of the power-lustful elders. Her only crime, believing that love was stronger than fear. The first stone struck, then another. Daniel, helpless in the crowd, lost his faith with every drop of her blood that darkened the sand. He cried out, broken yet angry. Daniel wandered from town to town, bitterness his only companion. He worked as a blacksmith's apprentice, hammering metal with the same rage that burned in his soul. Faith was for the weak. One evening, as he closed the forge, he noticed a girl sitting under a mango tree, roasting groundnuts in the fading sunlight. She was beautiful, with eyes that held galaxies within them. Her name was Miriam. At first, he avoided her, but fate, or something more, kept bringing them together. Miriam was unlike anyone he had met. She had a fierce love for life, for people, and most confusingly, for God. Their first real conversation happened in the village well. She had been humming a song that his mother used to sing. The melody struck him like a blow, stirring memories he had buried deep. "You know that song?" he asked, with his rough-sounding voice. Miriam smiled. "My mother sang it to me as a child. It's a song of trust." "Trust is a fool's game," Daniel muttered, turning away. But Miriam wasn't deterred. Over the weeks, they met often, at the market near the forge, along the dusty paths winding through the village. Miriam had a way of making him talk, of pulling stories from him that he hadn't shared with anyone. She told him about her father, a fisherman who had died in a storm, and how she had clung to faith in the aftermath. She spoke of her dreams, of finding beauty in brokenness, of seeing hope where others saw only despair. Daniel found himself drawn to her. This rush of emotions was overwhelming. She had a lightness that he lacked, a belief that seemed unshakable, and yet he resisted. One evening, as they walked together, the tension between them came to a head. "You believe so easily," Daniel said, shaking his head. "As if life hasn't taught you how cruel the world can be." Miriam met his gaze, unflinching. "I believe because I know suffering. Faith is not about ignoring pain. It's about holding on to something greater." He scoffed. "Faith took everything from me. My mother died because of it. And you expect me to trust that same God?" Miriam's expression softened. "I expect nothing, but I hope one day you'll see that faith is not what took her." The conversation haunted Daniel for days. He wanted to push her away, but he couldn't. And then, just when he had started to let her in, tragedy struck. Tragedy struck again. Miriam fell ill. It started with fatigue, then a persistent fever that would not break. The town's healer shook his head. Her time is short. We have no cure. Daniel panicked. He had spent weeks resisting her faith, arguing against it. Yet now he found himself helpless, willing to do anything to save her. She lay in her bed, her once bright eyes dulled with exhaustion. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need you to trust." Panic clawed at Daniel's throat. He sat by her bedside, gripping her frail hand. He had vowed never to pray again, but as he watched Miriam's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, a war raged within him. Was he willing to lose her too? With trembling hands, he fell to his knees. "God, if you are real, don't take her. Take me instead. Just let her live." A warmth flooded the room, a peace he had not known since his mother's death. And then Miriam's breathing steadied. Her fever broke. Daniel wept, not just because she was healing, but because something inside him had changed. Days passed, and Miriam regained her strength. Daniel, however, struggled to understand what had happened. "God never left you," Miriam said one evening. "You just stopped looking." Daniel realized she was right. Faith had not taken his mother. It had sustained her. And now, after all these years, it had found him again. With time, his heart softened. He prayed, not out of desperation, but out of love. And in that love, he found the God he had once abandoned. For the first time since that fateful night, Daniel whispered his mother's name, not in sorrow, but in hope. The end.